Good afternoon. On June 29, 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down race-conscious admissions policy at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, effectively banning affirmative action on college campuses nationwide. Prior to this decision, 9 states in the United States have banned race-based affirmative action. California in 1996, the state of Washington in 1998, which was rescinded in 2022, Florida in 1999, Michigan 2006, Nebraska 2008, Arizona 2010, New Hampshire and Oklahoma 2012, and Idaho 2020. Affirmative action aims to address racial discrimination by recognizing and responding to the structural barriers that have denied underrepresented students access to higher education and has had an integral part of many U.S. colleges and universities' admissions policies since the 1960s and 70s. Although corporations are already legally prohibited from making hiring and firing decisions based solely on race, the Justice's landmark ruling, which bans race-conscious admissions decisions at higher education institutions, could lead employers to revamp their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Court Justice Sotomayor stated, "The majority opinion is not grounded in law or fact and contravenes the vision of equality embodied in the 14th Amendment." She continued stating that the court stands in the way and rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress. It holds that race can no longer be used in a limited way in college admissions to achieve such critical benefits. And so, holding the court cements a superficial rule of color blindness as a constitutional principle in an endemically segregated society where race has always mattered and continues to matter. Therefore, the Supreme Court ruling has not directed legal effects on workplace laws yet. This is the slippery slope. But it could be problematic for companies already running afoul of existing federal protections against decisions based on protected traits such as a person's race, gender, and age. More importantly, the Supreme Court's decision may influence broader public perception around diversity and alter societal expectations regarding affirmative action. And many of us as employers may face pressures, both internally and externally, to modify our DE&I policies. I'd like to take this time now to have my panelists come and join me in conversation to discuss this particular issue. I'd like to first introduce William Generett, also known as Bill, our Senior Vice President, Duquesne University. Cheryl Ruffin, Affirmative Action Manager, University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Paul Spradley, Senior Vice President, DE&I Dollar Bank. Devon Taliaferro, Talent Acquisition Coordinator, the City of Pittsburgh. And regrets from Doris Carson Williams. And our great Doris Carson Williams. Let's give her a hand of applause. For the sake of time, I want to address a couple of these questions to Ms. Williams, Ms. Carson Williams, as it relates to the work that she does as the President CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce. So the way that I broke down these questions, we're focusing on do we need to pause? Okay. The second thing I wanted to talk about, changes. And then the last thing I want to talk about, do we need to remarket our brand? Okay. So Ms. Carson Williams, corporate America has embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, particularly in the wake of the protests over George Floyd's killing in 2020. The Supreme Court ruling opens the door for employees, conservative activists, to bring legal challenges to those policies. Does this ruling create a pause in DE&I efforts for your clients, your customers?
Thank you, and I apologize because I'm going to have to leave after I make my comments, but directly to your point, ladies and gentlemen, we're on a slippery slope. We know what the Supreme Court said, but if you notice, you haven't heard much about corporations because most of them, in fact, all of them, are waiting on the next shoe to drop, but they're waiting to see what the Department of Education is going to do because the Supreme Court ruled on colleges and universities. Corporations are now looking to see what that's going to translate to, so it's a stay tuned issue, but you're going to see that corporations are going to change their language. Supplier and diversity, as we call it today, may not exist tomorrow. It may be called something different, like belonging. They're going to get rid of the targets. You're going to see they'll have goals and different metrics, all that are part of the changing trend for DEI, and that will filter down to small businesses. But I said to Bill when we were sitting over there, if you want to talk about Tally going national, I don't know if Evan is still here, now's the time for Tally to step up and be the weave that goes through some of this, because we have to make sure we don't lose ground. That's correct. Small businesses remain the engine that are driving our economy, and we have to step up not only for the small businesses, but for ourselves. We have to ensure that corporations don't change the language that eliminates us, but includes us. But the key for all of this is young people like diversity. They want it. They don't want to be in environments that don't have it. That's a very key point. I could go on, but I won't. Thank you, and I apologize. I've got a big meeting at 1 o'clock I have to be well prepared for. But Tim, Tim, you're on it. You're on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris Carson Williams. We appreciate your wisdom and your words today. So thank you. I'd like to address the other two corporations that are here, the city of Pittsburgh and Dr. Spradley, on that same question. You know, what are some of the, does this ruling create pause in your DEI efforts within your organization? And then I will ask higher education to respond to that same question.
Well, I think with the city of Pittsburgh and just even Mayor Gainey's vision of creating a city that's safe, welcoming, and thriving, I think it's almost pushed us into the archaic practices of city government. I'm new to the space of working in city government, but the roles that I've played in the nonprofit sector and just even in community engagement, really, coming in as a talent recruiter, really pushed even just the Department of Human Resources and Civil Service to look at some of its practices and how we hire and how we retain, quality candidates. And I think that's something that, I've even been able to kind of do a little bit of agitation myself, as one of the, first recruiters that was hired in 2022 that was focused specifically on recruitment. And whereas before it fell into a role, underneath the, long list of other duties that someone had to perform. So I think that, just the way that we are looking at how we need to address recruitment, how we need to address retention, even just training and building city employees up, who are already in, in positions or may have been in positions, for decades in these low-level roles, now pushing them forward to leadership roles so that they can continue to thrive and take care of their families. But then also, looking at strategies and how we need to bring new talent in to the city of Pittsburgh and allow them to be able to thrive by building on their careers in city government and being able to take advantage of the benefits and the resources that come from being a city employee. So I think that, with the mayor's vision, we've had to kind of thrust ourselves into like, how do we change the practices and the processes that exist, at the city government level, and how do we lead by example, when, the mayor says that, he has the most diverse staff of all, in the history of mayors of the city of Pittsburgh, that his staff is reflective of the city that that we live in and the city that we want to continue to create and allow for city residents to thrive.
Let's give her a round of applause for that response. I always say you always want to mirror your audience, your customer base. So I applaud Mayor Ed Gainey for making sure that his administration mirrors the people that you serve. So thank you for that. Dr. Spradley.
Good afternoon. So I think that the question was, is there a need to pause? And the answer is yes. And I think that there's always a need to pause. I think pausing allows us to stay nimble and fluid in doing this work of DE&I. I heard racism described once as being a shapeshifter. So though we are not being lynched like we were at one point, it looks different. It is being enacted in different ways. And so without us taking the pause and saying, all right, so what do I need to do to recalibrate, to think about this differently? I think that we're always in this state of running. And I think it's like being in a boxing match where there's not the time to take a break in between the periods. I would say that in 2016, former President Donald Trump had an executive order that banned diversity, equity, inclusion. And at that time, we had to pause. And the work didn't stop. If things continue at the rate that the polls are saying, he may be president again in 2024, and that same executive order that was reversed will be put back in place in corporate workspaces. And so we'll need to pause again, but I think it's how we're pausing, how we're thinking in spaces like this collectively and sharing resources that we'll be able to navigate every sort of form of what discrimination looks like in the workspace.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I agree. It's time to pause, and even I like the idea of recalibrating, because sometimes we have to change our language. I think someone spoke of that we may not be using the language diversity, but we'll be using belonging, and we'll be using equity as language that we can use in order to continue to move forward with the work that we intend to do. I would say the one thing that we have to understand is that the Supreme Court for the admissions is not the executive order that enables us to do affirmative action plans. It's a totally different executive order. It was not touched, but everyone suspects that there's going to be a large overreach in how we're going to interpret this information. So we have to pause, not only to look at our language, but we also have to pause to see how far they're going to overreach and how we can be prepared to continue this fight regardless of how they're moving. So we have not stopped anything we're doing at the University of Pittsburgh. We are certainly looking at our policies and trying to make them more equitable. And we're really being aware of this one thing, and I think everyone would agree that culture trumps policy every day of the week. So simultaneously, we're also looking at the culture of the University of Pittsburgh so that we can go forth and really create that space of equity and belonging as well. Thank you.
Bill?
So one thing about the Supreme Court decision is that it really dealt with the most selective schools in the U.S., and that's not where the vast majority of students go, right? So let's be clear. Only 6% of students go to colleges and universities that have a selectivity of 25% or less, right? 6%. The vast majority of students go to colleges and universities that have a selectivity of 70 to 80%, right? So it's interesting, you know, you have a lot of schools, and we have a lot of colleges and universities around here, and I'm taking off my Duquesne pen, that said, oh, we're behind affirmative action. Of course you are. You depend on black and brown students for your survival. Let's be clear. I mean, you know, barring one or two universities here and some programs, right? Every single university here wants black and brown students. I mean, when you admit 90% of your students, affirmative action doesn't affect you. So let's be clear there. The second thing is, yeah, we need to take a pause, but we need to fight harder than we've ever fought before. So pause does not mean not doing the work, right? It means, I think as Dr. Spradley said, being nimble, right? But let's be clear. You know, this is a slippery slope. It started out with college admissions, then it went to scholarships. There's a tech fund called the Fearless Fund that was started by black women to provide grants to black women tech entrepreneurs. They can't do that anymore, right? The appellate court said, nope, you can't do it. 2 Trump appointees, right? So yeah, so no, this slippery slope is moving. But again, we found a way to do things. We've made a way out of no way, right? And we're going to have to continue to do that, right? But you know, let's be clear as it relates to colleges and universities. Most students want to go to colleges and universities near where they live, right? And you know, I tell kids all the time, because I was a young man, and I overheard a conversation. He said, "I heard this affirmative action. I don't think I'll ever be able to go to school." And I said, that is so untrue. There are so many schools you'll be able to go to, and be competitive. What we're seeing is a rise in the number of students going to HBCUs and applying to HBCUs. I'm a proud HBCU graduate, right? And what's good is that gives competition to other schools. So here at Duquesne University, we know that affirmative action, no affirmative action, we better create a welcoming environment for black and brown students. If not, we might not be in existence 20 years from now. And we will see, and let's be clear, here in this region, we will see some colleges and universities go by the wayside, in part because they can't recruit black and brown students. So we have to use that to our advantage. And corporations the same, whether it's their workforce. Here, I mean, you know, Bill, you mentioned it. You know, you have companies that are like, look, if I can't get black and brown people to work for me, affirmative action, no affirmative action, my company's not going to exist. We see that in the construction trades all the time. So that's the elephant in the room. I think we will see corporations, not just, you know, George Floyd, that was a flash pan, right, where, you know, something terrible happened, the corporation said, oh, we're not bad people, we care. Well, we know that's an emotion that becomes fleeting, right? But when it comes to their money and their bottom line, that's not fleeting, right? And so we're going to see them sort of buck at some of this, because they don't have the workforce, they don't have the dollars, they go out of business.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing from this first question is, you know, I hear a lot of, we now need to do code switching. and not using the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, but using words like belonging as part of our strategy to kind of overcome some of these invisible barriers that is trying to be put in place. Would you agree?
Yeah, so I think that even so belonging is a word. I think that there's some other opportunities for, instead of affirmative action, we might say equitable career plan, right? We might say intentional hiring strategy. We might say inclusive business strategy. And so we're using language that is palpable externally, but has the same meaning because we're still doing the work. We're not slowing down, we still do the work. We might change the names, but that's because we're being relevant and shifting with the times.
Staying with that vein, changes. What are some of the changes that you have already implemented based off of this Supreme Court ruling, specifically talking to higher education institutions?
Well, so I'll take that. So we actually got sued about 3 years before the Supreme Court, saying that, we shouldn't have race-based, gender-based scholarships. So we were a little ahead of the curve, and it was a lawsuit by the same person who took their case to the Supreme Court. We actually took our case to the Office of Civil Rights under the Biden administration, and unfortunately, the Office of Civil Rights said, you're right, you can't do this. And it was actually a gender-based scholarship. We had a Women in STEM gender-based scholarship program, right? Women in STEM, right? And so we had to change the language. We actually had to go back and change all the languages to our scholarships. Now, here's the thing. As we know, language is language. I think after George Floyd, we saw some corporations come up with the best language around DEI. They still didn't hire black people, right? So we had to change the language, but what we've worked hard to do is to make sure the right people were in the seat to decide on who got the scholarships, et cetera. But, and two, you get the lawyers in the room, and you can be sophisticated. I mean, you talk about socioeconomic status, right? You talk about place-based scholarships. So if we do a place-based scholarship around the Hill District, who are we going to get, right? So you don't have to say black. Yeah. So there are ways to get around it, and we have had to do it. Very frustrating, but kind of is what it is.
Yeah. I'm not in the admissions or scholarship space, but I would say that what we need to continue to keep in mind is who we're still going to be willing to serve. And from an affirmative action plan perspective, that is still women, underrepresented minorities, individuals with disabilities, and protected veterans. So no matter how we, slice it, those are going to be some of the people that we're going to serve, including our LGBT community as well. So we have not lost focus on who the folks are who are being marginalized in our communities, both as admissions into academic institutions, as well as coming into the workforce. So as long as we remain focused on that, we can call it whatever we want, but we maintain our focus on the individual that we would like to see come into our community.
Okay. Thank you.
And I just want to say, we have to constantly monitor it because, I did say that, when we're looking at undergraduate admissions, most college universities aren't selective, right, that art students are going to. But there are programs at different college universities, so law school. We're opening a medical school, right? And we made some pretty big commitments about how, our class would look racially. And so we got a first class coming up in 2024, and, I, along with others, we're looking, right? And that's where the community comes in, right? Question colleges and universities, question businesses, right? Because it's moving and it's dynamic. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'd like to address this next question to everyone, and I'll start with Devon and also Dr. Spradley regarding, different language to attain the same goals. You know, thinking about rebranding, when you're rebranding, like Bill just gave an example of changing the name of a program at Duquesne University. What are some of the things that you're thinking about or you're doing as it relates to rebranding your DE&I initiatives?
So I think one of the things, of course, that I'm most responsible for is the recruitment of talent to work for the city of Pittsburgh and across all city departments. And so one of the things that I think for me was really important, and Dr. Spradley used the word intentional, is being very intentional about how we approach recruitment strategies, from the graphics that we use in publications, in print, in the wording that we use in radio ads, to and those are the things that I'm responsible for doing. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's just making sure that we're intentional about how we approach recruitment. I think the other thing, in like branding, but it also ties to even the previous question about just the changes in the processes. We have been, so for probably the first time, all 3 public safety bureaus are led by African Americans. The first African American woman as the chief of emergency medical services, a black fire chief, and a black chief of police. That's pretty incredible for a city like Pittsburgh. And so one of the things that I think they have talked a lot about and have kind of worked together with the Department of Human Resources and Civil Services, building out recruitment teams and how we approach recruitment of minorities, but also for women, especially in fire, where with over 700 or so firefighters, only 6 of them are women, 1 black woman. And so there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to how we approach recruitment, especially in public safety. You want people who, service you, whether it's, if your house catches on fire, if, there's a situation in your community where you need, emergency medical services or the service of the police, is making sure that there's representation in the people who show up at your door. And so I think that's something that, we've also been able to kind of put the, in the loop of rebranding, is making sure is how we present ourselves, how we address, what is our mission and our vision when it comes to servicing the city of Pittsburgh residents. And so I think that's something that's really important to me in recruitment. But then also, we look at some of the other, strategies and things that we approach to how we better market city government. It's not, the most glamorous place to work, and the pay isn't as good as you might see in a larger corporation or bigger firms. But I think it's just creating an environment. Somebody mentioned earlier about psychological safety. And I think that's something that the mayor has really been intentional about doing and making sure that all City of Pittsburgh employees have a space and have opportunity to be able to use their voice, have opportunity to be able to address, some of the circumstances that they're going through, the opportunity for professional growth, and to be aware of what's going on around us. And I think those are all very intentional efforts to be able to change the branding of city government and how we approach city government, that we work for the residents of the city of Pittsburgh. That is, my mission and my goal when I come to work every day to the table, and I have a seat at the table, to be able to talk about how we approach recruitment so that, more people look like me, just aren't in those low-level positions, but they are in higher positions, that they're getting promotional opportunities in the Department of Public Works, that it's not just the people who are collecting refuse, but they are the people who are the foremen and are calling the shots on the higher level. And I think that's where we have to be able to get to when we look at city government and how it has functioned and operated, throughout time, is like, where do we need to go to be able to better support city residents and employees.
Thank you for that. Dr. Spradley.
Yeah, so you would ask the question around like the branding of marketing and things, and I actually personally don't use the term diversity as much because like I want to guide people towards the behaviors behind diversity, right? And so I'm okay changing the language instead of us having, you know, we used to have a DEI career fair. We now have a career fair where I only reach out to the African American Chamber of Commerce and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Asian Chamber of Commerce, which the president is here. So I reach out to those groups for our career fair. And if we have white Americans show up, that's great. I welcome them because we want that to happen, but we're addressing the equity in the space. I think the push for me around the branding and pushing back on the behaviors goes back to a quote that Dr. King, when he went to Cornell College, he said, "It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me." He's speaking about policies and putting things in place that are stronger than sort of this good intent. So one of the things that has happened at a very conservative organization like Dollar Bank is our mission statement has changed to include inclusive language. One of our core values now is inclusion. So one of the things that you do from a strategy, if you're thinking about strategy, is you have your senior leadership buy into this idea with a mission statement or the core values, because there's not a single, Pittsburgh is incredibly polite. We are a nice city, but we'll hide behind that niceness and not do the work. So what happens is you have folks like us that will say, hey, we've got this mission statement now. This is what this actually looks like for us to be inclusive. Now we're gonna do this, but you all voted on this. This was your mission statement. This is your core values. And so the strategy that we've been doing it was a positive change that has happened in June of this year was our mission statement changed to be more inclusive and welcoming of our community. And so did our core values. And now that we have that, it's up to us to hold the organization accountable in that space so that we're making the type of changes that are necessary. And we don't need to use words like diversity. We could just do the work of creating diverse spaces.
That's excellent. Have your customers recognize that you made that switch, that change?
It's in all of our branches. Yeah, we have our mission statement in all of our branches, and we've done some work where we have a video that runs in all of our branches as well too. So I think our customers have noticed, part of our marketing branding efforts is making sure that there's a diverse representation of people in our advertisements, that there's diverse voices in our radio spots, and so forth and so on. We have, advertising on Froggy, and we have advertising on Whammo. And so we're covering different spaces where we have opportunities to impact and engage the community and let them know that we are the bank of the community.
That's excellent. Thank you. Would you like to go?
In terms of marketing and branding, certainly that's something that's always changing at a university because we're trying to keep up with everything. In terms of using inclusive language, that's very, very important to us. It's part of our institutional plan for Pitt, that we're going to become this diverse and inclusive organization that welcomes everyone regardless of any of their identities. So we really are doing that as a result of, not necessarily a result of some of these changes, but recognizing the changes. We're ensuring that we're using inclusive language and that we're using inclusion when we're doing all of our marketing, for sure.
So you guys are being proactive even before all of this?
We always have to try to, every generation has a different way that they want to see things. So there's part of it that we have to always look and see with this next generation, what are we going to do to draw them in? So it's just a matter of how we have to do business.
Bill?
The cool thing about being in college university is you're working with, the new generation, right? The next generation. And the next generation dictates that environments and spaces be inclusive, right? So again, as a college university, oftentimes we're sort of at the forefront of, with the marketing and the promotional material and, hopefully creating those environments. The reality is if you don't create the environment, you see pretty quickly that it's not working because students leave, your retention rate goes down. And so, I think for the most part, those college universities that are good are pretty attuned at doing that because, what works for the boomers doesn't work for, these younger students.
I'm going to dovetail off of that comment. Godfrey did the survey, and some of the things that rose to the top, why did people stay? Family, cost of living, that was the number one. What are some of the challenges? Systemic racism, okay? That was number one. And then, why did people leave or want to leave? And that is pay, economics, and opportunities. So, what would you say in response to these three things that I just named, the number one things from the survey? What are some of your recommendations that you can share with other employers here, recruiters that are here, young people that are in college that are here, and how we need to move forward and continue to fight for opportunity for the underrepresented groups?
So, I tell everybody, be as competitive personally as you can be. If Pittsburgh's not treating you right, don't be afraid to go, right? A lot of people don't, we love this region, want to stay in the region, but, if the region is not treating you like you deserve to be treated, right, and you can then get something elsewhere, because, there are a lot of people who say, oh, Pittsburgh's not treating me right, but the reality is you're not necessarily competitive enough to go somewhere else. But if you're competitive, that's a hard lesson, right? Because the market doesn't lie. People say, I'm going to move to Atlanta, D.C. Okay, well, do it if you can. Just be as competitive as you can, because on the flip end, what you can do is you can use that, because if they really want you, and I think you have a sister here that replaced Larry Davis, right, who moved, who left, right? And now Pittsburgh said, oh, we made a mistake. We want you back, right? They'll have you come back, or they'll create environments for you. But, as I tell people, I'm not going to be a slave anywhere. If Pittsburgh doesn't treat me right, and I've left, I've come back, don't be afraid to leave. That's not what a lot of people want to hear, right? Because we love Pittsburgh, we want to see Pittsburgh grow. But, yeah, there's some racism here that you don't find in other places. It just is what it is. I have a good friend. She got an incredible job in Akron, right? Because she couldn't get that job here. And thank God she moved to Akron, because now she can feel her God-given purpose. But don't let people in Pittsburgh define you. And you tell Pittsburgh corporations, you better wake up, because like Mr. Bill Flanagan said, there are companies that aren't choosing to come here because of diversity, right? Love this city, but we're 10, 15, 20, 30 years behind. And everybody just has to make sure that they are careful about how that plays out in their own individual lives.
I'd like to say shout out to Dr. Carner and the work that they're doing at the Center for Race and Social Problems, and I have the privilege, yes, yeah. I have the privilege of working with Ron Idoko on his Racial Equity Consciousness Institute, and we just finished a cohort, and to see the synergy and the energy in the room as we're dealing with these extremely, very, very intense and difficult subjects, and seeing the light bulbs go on in people. One of the things I think that's vitally important is the more people that we get to really we're just not training people. We're getting them to think about racism differently. We're getting them to think about how systemic it is. And the more you do that, then they'll be able to see it when they're out in the world. So we're trying to create a space, not only in the University of Pittsburgh, but community members can join it as well, where you can be able to identify and see it when you go out places, and then you're able to call it in so that we can make some changes. So I'm getting ready to retire. I'm not going anywhere, but I do want to see this place better when I leave, when I'm done, so.
Thank you for that. And congratulations on your future retirement.
I'm trying to be like you when I grow up. I'd like to retire as well. But before I retire, I think that the thing that's most important to me is creating those pathways for young people. It's been said, on this panel and even throughout this conference today, that if we don't create, so for me, professionally, I feel like I'm still growing professionally, but at some point I will reach that space and good old time where I can, lay down and relax and enjoy the fruits of my labor, I guess. But before that, I want to be able to create those pathways to make sure that young people have the opportunity to learn and to grow and to be in environments where they can see themselves in the future. And I think the mayor has really invested in that, like straight in the door with his Pathways to Prosperity program and his partnership with the Pittsburgh Public Schools Career and Technical Education programming, and creating pathways for CTE students to be able to see the types of jobs that they can have in city government coming even out of high school. If they want a job coming straight out of high school, they have the opportunity to see that pathway through internship opportunities, paid internship opportunities, and shadowing job opportunities to shadow city employees. The other efforts that the mayor's office has invested in is the Youth Civic Leadership Academy, which I was a graduate of the Civic Leadership Academy in the previous administration, in exposing city residents to how city government works, but doing that with young people. I never had the opportunity to really see or understand how city government worked when I was in high school. And so so today I brought my 2 interns that are part of the YCLA program because I wanted them to see what it is that I do on my day-to-day basis, and with the hopes that they have the opportunity to see what it looks like to work in city government, but also to see what it looks like to be amongst other professionals, and especially other professionals of color. Like, this is an opportunity that they may not get to see on a day-to-day basis, especially when we look at what the teaching staff in public schools looks like compared to the students that occupy those seats. And so that's something I think that's really important that we have to continue to do. But I also look at my own personal experiences where I was sometimes the only person of color in the whole entire department or company, especially in nonprofit. And so I try to create those opportunities, just even in any professional space that I navigate in, is creating opportunities for somebody to come in the door behind me so that they don't have to fight to get those, the opportunity is already presented to them. And so the more that I have been invested in is what I want to continue to invest in. And I think that's where we kind of start to break down those walls and the hurdles that we have, a lot of us maybe have experienced, in our professional careers, but be able to break them, overcome those hurdles so that the next generation can follow behind us and knock it out the park.
Thank you for that.
So I really appreciate a lot of what you said there. And I think that this idea of discrimination and anti-Blackness and removing affirmative action and changing this is baked into America's history since the very beginning, that it was not meant for Black Americans to be seen as anything more than lesser than in every situation. And so it just keeps shifting over and over and over again. And the thing that frustrates me is that there are Black Pittsburghers who do not believe that they've been endowed by the almighty creator to be who they can really be, and incredible Black young Pittsburghers, right? And so there's folks that grow up in this system where they don't think about themselves as excellent. They think about themselves as, I'll take what I can get, or I'm gonna operate in these spaces. And it frustrates me because we've been endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we can pursue happiness in Pittsburgh, in this space, even though it's in a system that's not meant for us to thrive. It's in a system that's not meant for us to thrive. That doesn't mean that we can't not thrive, right? And so the way that we do that is in part, and I'm so grateful for people like Tim Stevens, who has been speaking anti-Blackness since the 70s, right? Like, he's been in these spaces unapologetically saying this is what needs to happen, and he's speaking life into young professionals. So I hear him speak, and I'm like, man, that's awesome, because he's talking to me as a Black man who I might have started to have these thoughts that I can't do this because there's laws in place that are pushing against me. There are systems in place in my work organization that make it tough for me to go into work with a smile on my face. But I hear voices of folks like that who are saying, you are a black man and you're powerful, and God granted you with some gifts, and go and walk in those gifts. And then we have white allies, right? Bill Flanagan's been using his platform for years to say, let's uplift the black community. That's what this, like when we talk about advice or next step, if we are in this space where we say, we know this is gonna happen, we know that anti-blackness rhetoric and policies and laws are going to happen, cool. What we're gonna do over here, as for this house, as for this group, what we're gonna do is when I see you, I'm gonna look you in the eyes and say, like, I see you, young queen, right? Like, I see you, and I see that, yeah, you. I'm talking about you, the intern, right? Like, I see you, young man. Like, I see that y'all are gonna be excellent, and I wanna invest in you. So the way that you invest individually, like, that influence is a thing that we can all do, right? Like, Greg Spencer was here earlier, and I told him, it's like, you were my first mentor, and I didn't even know how to be a mentee, but he was gracious enough to allow me to have a second conversation. He invested in me as a black man, which is the opposite of all of these rules and things that are in place. I think we need to come together with everyone who's interested in the city of Pittsburgh with pushing against anti-blackness. So our Jewish allies, our Hispanic allies, our Asian allies, our white allies, and then we say, what is the work we can do in our pockets, in our spaces, to create spaces and opportunity for black and brown Pittsburghers? That's where when I think about a next step, it starts with the folks that are in this room and saying, I'm making the commitment to do something both locally to the person that's right in front of me, and then in my lane, I'm gonna do anything that I can to push back against this space.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Say ditto.
Okay.
Said it all.
Yes, go ahead.
There's a Netflix video by Jerry Robinson. He is a former ACLU attorney, called Who We Are. And if you've never had the opportunity to watch that documentary, I would suggest that you do. It talks a lot about the ebbs and flows of African Americans specifically making strides, and then something would happen and it would fall away. But if you haven't done it, it's called Who We Are by Jerry Robinson.
I want everybody to give my panelists a round of applause. One of the things that I want to end my note for this panel conversation is what you saw that happened on June 29th, 2023 is just the beginning, okay? And the only way that we can fight back, we have to vote. We have to be engaged in our community. We have to be aware of what's happening in Washington, D.C. We need to talk to our legislators, our our representatives, and we have to vote. In each and every election, not just the big election every year in November. We got to work and start voting during our primaries as well. And that is the only way we are going to make changes. All right, thank you.